Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Olivia. Today I have a special treat for you. I have a newfound friend connection, Nikki Scott, who is a therapist specializing in grief therapy and maternal therapy. So if you're a mama, if you have lost someone in your life and you need some conversation tips and tricks with regards to grief, dive in, go and grab something to drink, and let's jump into our conversation. Hey, Nikki, thank you so much for agreeing to jump on my channel. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you again. I'm so
Good
glad
to
we made
see
our
you.
connection and we can stay connected.
Yeah. So, a little bit about how I met you. I met you, was it September?
Yeah, end of September.
The end of September at the Novi Women Expo. We had tables right next to each other, and I just started to talk to you and find out what you did. And when you said you were a grief therapist, I was like, oh, I need to have you on my channel
Yeah.
because I can relate to grief, right? Recently, in March, I lost my mom. And that was probably the worst time, the worst kind of pain and grief I've ever gone through. And I needed some support in, going through that. I'm still going through that, but needed some support. And so I imagine that if I'm, transparent about needing support with losing my mom, then there are plenty of other women out there. So first, introduce yourself, and then let's talk about some of the tips, tricks, and recommendations that you would refer to women who are going through grief.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry about your mom. I know we talked about it last time, but it's hard. It's so hard. Um,
Yes.
Such a special connection too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Um, so I started off, I got my bachelor's from Wayne State in psychology because at first I was so interested in the brain. I'm gonna be a therapist right away and we're gonna do this. And then I started volunteering at hospice while I was getting my bachelor's, and I fell in love with hospice work, and everything it entailed. I did every single thing a hospice volunteer at that time could do. So I did hands-on patient care in our care center with people who are dying. I did the bereavement department support groups. I did home care. So then I decided, instead of pursuing a master's in counseling, to pursue a master's in social work. And that opens a master's in social work, opens so many doors for you. So I knew eventually I could be a therapist because that was hopefully the end goal, but I took a sidetrack with hospice, and I'm so glad I did. I spent almost 11 years total in hospice, doing,
Wow.
again, everything a hospice social worker could do: home care, care center. In the last couple of years, I was in the bereavement department, only doing grief counseling. And I fell in love with that too, being a grief counselor. During that time, I got my doctorate in social work because I also wanted to teach one day. I wanted to pass this knowledge I've gained and hopefully start changing the narrative about grief and loss and death and dying, even in a micro way, right? To students who will end up being future practitioners in the field.
Mhm.
So then I started teaching too. And then along this time, I had my two boys. They're only 18 months apart. And I decided I wanted to be with them as much as possible. So I made the really hard decision to leave my career as a hospice social worker to open a private practice, where I only work like 1.5 days a week. So I can be with them most of the time. And then I teach full time at Oakland University. I teach social work courses there. So it's been really flexible to do that.
Girl, you've got a lot going on. You're like super smart. Did you say two masters?
Master and then doctorate.
Oh my goodness. So I'm so thrilled to meet women who are super educated, and once they find a area that they like, a space that they like as a career, they just continue to educate themselves and get in all the credentials possible. So kudos to you, girl.
Thank you.
Um, so you mentioned that you did hospice for 11 years.
Mhm.
I feel like anybody that works in hospice need to like be called, need to love that area
Mhm.
because it can be, sad.
Mhm.
Did you find that working with hospice, like you took home any of those kind of sad or emotional heaviness from your clients home?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely the first few years. I was also very young, right? So I didn't really have like a mentor to help guide me. And that's why also now I want to be that mentor for social work students and for the
Yeah.
future to help them like unpack to not carry that stuff. Because there's a difference between empathy and then taking on the person's emotions. So you're allowed to have feelings. We're all allowed to have feelings. But what are we doing with those feelings, right? Like this is we're here, we're suspending our stuff to be with a person who's like at the end of their life or their family member who's grieving. So we have to be with them there completely present and mindfully. Um, so it took me time to learn it, but that's okay. It takes
Yeah.
time. You're always
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah, I will say too, I guess this is kind of like a testimony, but so my mom was on hospice for almost 2 years. And her staff, and there was quite a few, but her staff, as far as like the nurses and the social worker, and then there were different nurses. There was like LPN and an RN,
Mhm.
so there were different kinds of nurses. Then she had also like an aide that would come and give her bath and stuff like that. And I will say that these were some of the most cheerful people. I had not had any experience with hospice staff prior to my mom, but I was so relieved that they were, they came in and they were talking to my mom and,
Mhm.
they were telling jokes and asking questions. And they were like, they really loved their job. My mom looked forward to when they would come and do whatever the care was that was needed with her. And it was helpful to me too because I was feeling sad and feeling the weight of this responsibility of managing everything with all her medical and medication and all these things. Two different, even though she was in hospice, she was seeing outside medical doctors in different
Mhm.
areas, but her hospice team were so joyful,
Mhm.
and they brought such a light to our home, to my mom. And so I think it goes to say that, when you are working in a field that you enjoy, that you feel that you're called to, you bring this light. It
Mhm.
doesn't seem like work at all. And it's such a great impact. Would you agree?
Yes, I feel like you would see that often with people who are in hospice. They're there because they genuinely want to be, and I say it often too because I see it a lot. Grief intersects a lot with motherhood too,
Yeah.
because it brings you back to that moment. So like if you're with someone again who's dying, and we help people across the lifespan, right? Older people aren't the only ones who are dying. Unfortunately,
Right.
people across
Mm-hmm.
the lifespan are dying. So when you're with like a 50-year-old dying from cancer, how can you
Mm-hmm.
not go home and like cherish your life and your loved ones?
Yes.
And how can
Yes.
you not be humbled by it? Even a 96-year-old whose family's not ready to say goodbye to her yet, how could
Yeah.
you go home and just revel in how much you love your babies or your family or your I think it humbles you and it makes you grateful because a lot of people will say I don't know how you do this work and I don't know how
Yeah.
if you tried it even just for a little bit, I feel like anyone would see how much it would humble them and I think we need more of that collectivism.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a true statement across the board when you mentioned about lifespan. To me, it doesn't matter how young or how old the person is that you love, that they're passing away, you're never ready. Like I was not ready, and my mom was 70 years old. And to some people, that's young, and to other people, it's old, but I wasn't ready. I just thought that she would be like 90 something, right?
Mhm.
But if she was 90 something, I don't know that my emotions and losing her would be any less.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so we're gonna dive into some other questions. Like, can you talk a little bit about some of the stages of grief?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Most people have questions about this too. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she's the pioneer of these 5 stages. when she first started the whole concept and the theory, she was actually studying people who were dying at the end of their life. So when she pi- came up with these 5 stages of what people now have taken to associate with grief, she was actually associating with people who are dying. So anger,
Mhm.
acceptance, like all the whole thing.
Right.
But when it comes to grief, actually, um, there are no stages. Grief is
Mm.
not like this linear thing where you have a feeling and then you go to the next stage and you have another feeling. Um, a lot of people think that like once I get to this stage, I'm going to be, and then once I finish all the stages, I'm going to be done with my grief. I'm going to be good.
Right.
So when I see clients too, and especially in my work at the hospice too, telling people that we kind of throw the notion of the 5 stages related to grief specifically out the window. Because there's no stages. It's not linear. It's actually like a roller coaster, right? Some days you might be
Yes.
okay. Some days you might be like absolutely horrible. Feel like you took 10 steps back. Um, all the feelings that she talked about are so valid and real, but they don't go in stages.
Right. It's just kind of a tossed salad, if you will, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All the
So
feelings.
yeah, I will agree that, like I still have good days, but I still have days where it just takes me by surprise.
Mhm.
Like, so we're at 8 months now since my mom passed. And, Mother's Day was really hard, right? I didn't even want to like celebrate Mother's Day with my kids, which, was a whole thing. And my husband was like, babe, you're still a mom, you
Mhm.
have to continue the traditions for them. And then, all the birthday seasons, like my 12-year-old's birthday was in October. And that was the first birthday we had without her because our
Mhm.
family was so, close. And then my middle son, Gabriel's birthday was a couple weeks ago. And so I'm finding that a lot of the first are like, I feel good. I'm doing all the things. I'm exercising. I'm taking my vitamins. And,
Mhm.
I finished the grief share program. But when certain dates come up, it's kind of like, it's like starting over again. It takes me by surprise. And it's like my body figured that out before
Mhm.
my mind, before I made that connection with my mind, like I
Mhm.
woke up crying, like literally woke up crying. And I had to think about it like, okay, what's happening? And it was all because it was a birthday that my mom wasn't
Mhm.
here. My daughter got married, there was a bridal shower that she wasn't here. And it was a tea party theme. And my mom loves tea. So I agree with you that I don't know necessarily that there's like a stage of stage 1, 2, and 3, but more of like the roller coaster and more of some days I feel great. And then other days I don't want to get out of bed. And there are some months that has passed by. And from talking to people, and maybe you can share some insight into this, from talking to other people who've lost their moms, they've told me, well, there's no time limit on it. It's been 9 years, it's been 12 years, and they are still like weeping and feeling sad about losing
Sure.
their family members. Would
Yeah.
you agree?
Of course. Yeah. That's probably one of the biggest things. I try to meet people with grace when they try to say like you're still grieving or they're still grieving or they're not over it yet, right? Like it's because they haven't maybe experienced it or tried to put themselves in other person's shoes, but there's no time limit. There really isn't. Like you'll get sometimes we call them triggers, like you'll get re-triggered. You said it exactly. It lives in your body, just like trauma or traumatic stressors live in our body. Grief lives in our body. Lives in our brain. It lives in our hearts. Grief brain is a real thing too, like the fogginess like you might
Yes.
experience and like
Hmm.
especially the first couple of years because your brain's rewiring itself really on a biological level. Like how am I existing in this physical world without my person, without one of my people? Your brain's
Right.
very confused.
Hmm.
But you're right. They're like people try to say like, oh, why aren't you over it? Or it's been this long, but there's no time limit. I think that's another misconception. There's no time limit. We're going to grieve as long as we've loved them or we'll continue to love them. And that's forever. Right.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a great perspective. The forever piece, that's a great perspective. I hadn't given that much thought. Um, When would you say, because some people are closed off when it comes to like, okay, I need therapy, I need help. I'm not one of those people. I'm all about therapy, any kind of therapy that will help my life or, help my family get over a hump or, to be the best versions of ourselves. I'm pro therapy, but I recognize that everyone is not, has blockages or
Mhm.
misconceptions or whatever with
Mhm.
regards to like a taboo, especially in some cultures around therapy. When would you say is the right time, and or what are like the more severe signals to look out for where you would say to a patient or someone that's going through grief, like you really need additional support. You can't do it
Mhm.
on your own.
That's a good question. So when I was at the hospice, we would help anybody. It was basically free counseling. So sometimes people would call like the day after like a death of a loved one. And
Yeah.
sometimes we would have to say maybe wait a few months to call us because we tell people you have to go back to basics, like really those self-care, like sleep, eat, like nutritiously, taking care of yourself. Because they can't even like tell us their story, and telling your
Yeah.
story is part of the healing process, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's therapeutic just to sit with someone and let them cry.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but usually we'll say maybe wait a couple months till like maybe you can start talking a little bit, because a lot of the time people can't talk. And then totally appropriate to call, start therapy. The DSM on the other side of it added a few diagnoses: prolonged grief disorder and complicated grief disorder, which a lot of practitioners in the field have mixed feelings about, because grief is not a disorder,
Right.
and we have to diagnose to bill for it too. So it's like this hard place to live in. Um,
Hmm.
one of my favorite equations I like to tell people, because when you're grieving, you're in pain, right? You're missing someone, you're missing the life you were going to live, you're missing, like you said, milestones. So you have pain. But when you meet pain with resistance, pain times resistance equals suffering.
Hmm.
So I think that it's complicated grief and needs like more attention than talk therapy and support groups is when you're suffering,
Yeah.
and recognizing when you're suffering is important too. And
Hmm.
that's maybe when you talk to a doctor about maybe a medication or more intensive therapy, and more than talk therapy or grief counseling, right? So
Hmm.
and most of the time it's more than just the grief. It could be like underlying traumas or something that happened that you've never, like a person's never talked about before. So it's not just one thing. People are like systems theory made up all of these different systems.
Hmm.
So I think that when the hard part is when people have this pain and don't do anything with it, right? And then
Yeah.
they suffer from it.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
do something with it. You're allowed to feel, and then what are we going to do with it too?
Right. I like that you mentioned the medication piece because I've come across a couple of people in my inner circle who was just really stuck in grieving in a way that they were like losing weight and not
Mhm.
sleeping at all. And it was
Suffering.
prolonged for like a
Yeah.
couple of years. I think I talked to you about a particular person in my inner circle that I was talking to you about at the expo. And I was like, I don't know how to help her, like I recommend therapy and stuff. And she had had some therapy, but it wasn't doing what it needed to do. And so she had to, explore some different kinds of medication.
Mhm.
And thankfully now she's much better. She's hanging out a little bit and, having conversations. So I like I like the part that you mentioned that, at a certain point
Mhm.
that there might be some medication intervention that is needed um, for more severe cases,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And we are the experts of ourselves too. So, and that's what I try to instill and empower my clients with too. So it's important to know. Like when I was postpartum with my first, I had severe anxiety and I suffered for like 5 months. And then I'm like, I'm suffering and I'm resisting this pain. So I went on Lexapro for 2 years. And then I was like, okay, and now I have these coping skills. I teach my clients, I can use my coping skills, and I weaned myself off of it. So it's
Mhm.
like the same thing. It's a roller coaster, and different coping skills work at different times. So
Yeah.
that's important.
And that's a perfect segue into we talked about grief as a whole. But now, taking that next step over with grief as a mom. So
Yeah.
you mentioned a little bit about your postpartum. I also had postpartum depression. I think is what it was called. And at first, I had it with um, the first time I experienced it was with my first child, and I didn't know what it was. The doctors had not talked to me about it. I just knew that I was sad and I was crying all the time, and I didn't know why. I wanted to have kids.
Mhm.
My journey to motherhood wasn't easy, and I was really happy that God blessed me to be able to give birth at the time to my one daughter. But I was weeping and crying all the time, and I did not know that it was postpartum until I want to say maybe like 6 months in.
Mhm. Mhm.
Nothing was changing. And finally, a friend at church said, I think you have postpartum depression and you need to talk to your doctor. And so that was the first conversation. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even have the mind to like research it. This was 28 years ago, to like research it. But when I did go to my doctor, ask a bunch of questions, and I don't even remember what they are right now, but she ended up putting me on Paxil,
Mm,
and
mhm.
it was like a switch. It was
Mhm.
literally like within like 2 weeks, it was
Mhm.
like a switch where like the light came on. Like I was in darkness
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
but the light came on. And when I say darkness, like I never had any thoughts of hurting my
Yeah.
daughter or not taking care of her. I just had a sad feeling and I was crying all the time and I didn't know why. So is that a common thing in your profession that you see where women having a baby and just not feeling quite themselves, but don't
Yeah.
know what it is?
Yeah, it is exactly. And excuse me, I'm gonna let my dog out too. He's yelling
Yeah,
at me.
yeah,
No, so many of the women I talk to don't know what's going on, or they don't feel like they've had the proper education about what postpartum is and postpartum mental health struggles either. A lot of women don't realize the influx and then the severe decrease in hormones can cause a lot of it. So kind of like what I said about grief brain and the biological component of the whole thing. The same thing with like our bodies, prenatal and then postpartum too, is
yeah,
there's so much going on inside of us and we don't give ourselves a break for that too. Exactly what you said too. Like you kind of recognized it, but you didn't know what to do because you probably didn't have the support or
yeah.
education. Like that is very much required. So that's what makes it hard too. But um like you said
Well,
that the people at your church helped you. It was at church, right? You said
yeah, so one friend,
community. Community.
one friend from who was a mom. I think at that time she already had 3 kids, and I was just on number one. And she is the one who said, I think this is what it is.
Yeah.
And you should, go talk to your doctor. But so, okay, so I know that there are different kinds of postpartum
Mhm.
depression. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the different kinds or a couple of the different kinds?
Yeah, so they've been labeled as PMADs, so postpartum, mood and anxiety disorders is what they're called. So you have postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, there's even like postpartum OCD. So like some of the mental health conditions you might experience otherwise not being postpartum can get amplified postpartum.
Oh, wow.
I actually wrote a whole chapter about it in my book that I wrote for new moms, because mine was so yours was postpartum depression, mine was postpartum anxiety, where I felt like I couldn't cope with like all of the thoughts, anxiety, the rumination.
Yeah.
Sometimes in severe cases, and this isn't talked about as enough as it should be, is postpartum psychosis too,
Mhm.
where women don't get the help they need right away, and then it ends up turning into such horrible and sad situations for them. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's really important to talk about the mental health struggles
Hmm,
that people
hmm.
face, women face postpartum.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like now, like in 2024, I do feel like in some of the circles that I am in and networking in, I do feel like it's being talked about way more now
Mhm,
versus 28 years ago or even 20 years ago.
mhm,
I don't recall one person outside of my one friend ever talking about postpartum. I never saw a commercial. I didn't see a pamphlet in a doctor's office. Like it wasn't a thing. Whereas now I feel, I don't know if it's because women are more open about sharing these kinds of things with other moms, but for whatever reason, there's definitely a shift in the
Yeah,
conversation and the awareness of postpartum. And it's a great thing.
it is. Yeah. It's like same thing with grief too, right? Like we need to
Yeah.
talk about it. We need to break down the stigmas and misconceptions associated with it. A lot of things I tell my students and my clients too is we have to start getting comfortable with uncomfortable stuff, right? I think
Yeah.
that's how we heal. I think that's how we will make the world continue to make the world a better place is we have to talk about the things that are uncomfortable um,
Yeah.
to move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweeping it under the rug just, over time has not worked. And so I think as, information is so more readily available today than ever before, we just need to be completely transparent, and saying, hey, this is what I'm feeling and I need help.
Mhm.
And in that way, I do believe that we do put a dent in, a lot of the bad stuff, right? Especially with the postpartum psychosis where, women actually hurt and or you
Mhm.
know, kill their children and themselves.
Mhm.
I do feel like with the information that we've made some big strides in those areas. And but still more work is needed. And so, yeah, I want us to keep going to be transparent. And, I know I use my platform to really empower and support, women, you know, just for the simple fact that I needed help and a friend helped me when I needed to recognize that I was struggling with postpartum depression. And even with losing my mom, another friend who had lost her son said, I went to this program, I went to Grief Share, and it was so helpful for me when I lost my son, and I will go with you. And she repeated um, the program with me, just so that I didn't have to do it alone. And I feel like we need more of that. We need,
Mhm.
a lot more women to come alongside of other women and
Mhm.
says, hey, I've walked through this.
Mhm.
I have some information and maybe our circumstances may not be exactly identical, but there's some similarities there. And so try this, go here, talk to this person,
Mhm.
investigate this. And I just feel like it's a light in the world that we need more of.
Yeah, exactly. The collectivism you talk about
Yeah.
is important. Community is really important. I feel like honestly, that's how I think we'll heal the world and get to a better place. The collectivism of all of it. And I'm not naive to a lot of the things. I just really strongly believe in, like what you're saying, the collectivism, being there for each other. Kind of going back to grief, and I feel like postpartum. Research shows that isolation is as bad for your health as smoking like multiple packs of cigarettes a day. Like
Mhm.
social isolation, emotional isolation, like all is think back to COVID too, right? How many
Yes.
people suffered because of that?
Mhm. Yeah.
So community is so
Yeah.
important. Like you said, in any way, is it a support group? Is it someone at church? Is it a mom you meet at drop off? Is it, how are we gonna keep building community and taking collective action together to make the
Yeah,
world.
yeah, be the change you want to see, right?
Mhm.
So I know that your time is limited and I want to be respectful of that. I want to spend just a few more minutes and touch on a couple of things. One is, as a therapist, a grief therapist and a did you say mom, or I forgot the term that you use?
Maternal mental health,
But
yeah.
maternal mental health. Would you recommend this field for other women to enter into?
Yeah, I think so. I think lived experience is really important too. I think the desire to want to, like you said, make the world a better place, be the change you wish to see, empower people. I always I tell everyone you should go into social work. So
Yes.
and there's a difference too between which no diss to like masters in counseling programs. They're so wonderful. But with a master's in social work, you are learning about social injustices at micro and macro levels. You can do so much with a master's in social work. You can work in so many different fields. Like maybe one day I will go back to hospice when my babies are older.
Yeah.
You can do so much, and I feel like it's worth pursuing.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I agree. Social work in general, I feel is an area that we need more people who are passionate about wanting to make the world a better place, right?
Mhm.
So I do know that there's some stuff that comes with that, heavy caseloads and, maybe not necessarily having all of the support that is needed, right? But still, I do believe that it's an impactful area to go into, but I wanted to get your take since you're in
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
wanted to get your take on that. So you mentioned that you have you wrote a book
Mhm.
for new moms.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that because I remember at the Novi Women Expo, that
Yeah.
was the book that you were, talking to people about.
Yeah. So it's called Mama, Let's Talk About All of It. So every chapter has the title, Mama, Let's Talk About dot 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 and a different topic. This one is specific to kind of prenatal and postpartum. I want to work on I'm working on the toddler years because that's a whole different story for
It
maternal
is.
mental health. I do have
Mhm.
clients specific to toddler moms and maternal mental health, which is a whole different ballgame. But I wrote it because I read so many wonderful books. Some friends sent me some really wonderful books, but nothing ever was validating or like, hey, you're okay. If you feel this way, you're okay. If you feel that way, you're okay. If
Yeah.
your baby sleeps this way, it's all right. If your baby sleeps this way, it's all right. Like I feel like all of them were advice giving, and
Okay.
I wanted to write something like again as a therapist because I
Yeah.
can't be everybody's therapist, like
Right.
something a therapist would say to people like, hey, it's okay if your baby safely sleeps with you. It's okay if your baby likes their crib.
Yeah.
It's okay if, whatever. Like, so just validating what people are going through. It's okay if you don't fit into your jeans postpartum and it takes you 2 years to fit into those jeans again. That's another lived experience I had. It's
Yeah.
just, I wanted to be that validation for people that I didn't see in other literature.
And you know what, that's a really important space to kind of explore some more. I think as a culture, we look at social media and we look at social media and we look in magazines and we want to take on the idea that it's a one size fit all when it comes to giving birth, how you feel,
Yeah.
weight loss, and all those things, the changing of your body. We feel like it's a one size fit all, or we feel influenced like, oh, well, if she is back to her pre-baby weight at 6 months, then what's the problem with me?
Mhm.
There's a problem with me. And I love that, in your book, you're validating like, girl, some of us it takes 9 months, some of us it takes 2 years, some
Mhm.
of us it takes 3 years. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
my first one is 28 and my
Mhm.
youngest is 12, and I have not gotten back to my pre-baby weight.
Yeah, your body changes.
Right? My
Yeah,
body changes and it's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
There's no pressure for me to, beat myself up because my body now looks different after 6 pregnancies and 4 kids,
yes,
right? So
yeah,
I love that you're talking about that because that's real. And I don't hear that enough. I don't hear it on social media
mhm,
enough from moms. I don't hear it from my friend circle,
mhm,
who almost all of them are moms,
mhm,
right? I don't even hear it in my faith-based groups where the conversation is being had that it takes time and it's okay.
yeah, yeah, that's huge. Yeah,
Yeah, it is. So okay, so talking about, having babies and our bodies change, what are the top two um tips that you would say to a mom who recently had a baby and maybe is struggling with how they look or how they feel? What's the top two tips that you would say to that mom?
Yeah. First one I would say is like the one day at a time mentality. A lot of different types of like therapy use it. People who struggle with substance use, it's called harm reduction, where you don't just go like cold turkey or like try to get to the finish line. It's one day at a time mentality. And that it really works. Some of the simple things like actually really work.
Yeah.
And the second one that really helped me are mantras or affirmations. Like how you talk to yourself really matters. And I know it's hard
Yes.
sometimes when you're struggling with mental health, postpartum, like anxiety or depression. But combating that with how you talk to yourself is really important. So,
Yeah.
positive affirmations. A lot of when I had my first during COVID, I just kept telling myself over and over again, I can do hard things. I can do hard
Yes.
things over and over again. I can do the things I think I can't do. I kept
Yes.
telling it over and over and over. So I find a new mantra that works now as a toddler mom. It's a lot of more of like, okay, I can do this. This is not an emergency. It's like dealing with the toddler years is different, but being nice to yourself is really
Yes.
self-compassion is really the biggest thing I think to focus on.
Yeah. Showing ourselves grace in all areas,
Mhm.
right? When you're grieving the loss of a loved one, when you've just had a baby, in your business, in writing your book. I know you're working on another one,
Yeah.
but if we would, as women, if we would really put that into daily practice, it would, really help us in so many ways, on so many layers. It would really help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, where can my listeners find you? What
Yeah.
social and email and all of that?
Yeah. So my Instagram is called Mama Let's Talk About. So at Mama Let's Talk About. And you'll see link for my book on Amazon there. And then my website's mamalet'stalkabout.com. So
Oh, super
um,
easy.
it's all on my Instagram. So I know we'll be connected on there as well.
Okay. Do you have a website?
It's gonna be mamalet'stalkabout.com.
Okay, okay. And another question too is, do you take all forms of insurance? Like if, say a listener, watch our video and really connects with you and want to explore whether or not you're a good fit as a therapist
Yeah.
for her to come to. Do you accept all insurance, or are you just
Um,
cash base, or
yeah.
how do you do that?
Good question. Right now I can bill Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Blue Care Network, and Aetna. So
Okay.
those are the
Okay.
three right now. But I do have a list of referral. Like if I can't help someone, I can refer them out to someone as well.
I
Um,
love that. I
yeah,
love that.
yeah.
I love that. Well, I want to thank you so very much,
Thank you
Nikki,
so
for
much.
taking the time out of your busy schedule with your two little ones, and you've got another one cooking, and working. So you've got a full plate. I appreciate our connection at the Novi Expo. I want to thank you so much for taking time to come on my channel. And I hope that we stay in contact. I
Yes,
know I did
same.
refer your services to someone that I thought you would be a good fit to, and I'll continue to do
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wish you nothing but a happy pregnancy, and continue to enjoy your little ones, because time goes
Thank
by
you.
so fast.
Yeah, so fast. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an
Thank you
honor.
so much. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.